If you're like most people, or if you have a pulse and you are breathing right now, chances are you've dealt with some type of fear in your life, okay? Here's what I want to do. I have a list of fears, and just raise your hand. It's honesty time. Raise your hand if you've ever suffered from any of these fears. The first one is the fear of heights. Anybody ever been afraid of heights? Okay, good, a few of you. How about this one? Spiders. I have a brother that's like deathly afraid. He sees this little, and I mean, boom, he's out the door. It's like, I don't get that. But the next one I do get, snakes. Anybody afraid of snakes? I hate snakes. That's like the worst. I see a snake and I'm like out of there. Thunderstorms. How many of you are afraid of thunderstorms? Just a couple, yeah. I love thunderstorms. I think I've shared that with you before. I love to watch a good thunderstorm. Now, be real honest. When you were a kid, maybe even now, how many of you were afraid of monsters in the closet or under the bed? Anybody? I know I was. Russ is very enthusiastic about that one. I remember, like, if I had to get up in the middle of the night and go to the bathroom, I'd think about the monster under my bed, and I'd be laying there. You know how you get out of bed and you kind of step way, so he can't grab your leg, That was me. So, ghosts. Anybody afraid of ghosts? I ain't afraid of no ghost, right? Call Ghostbusters. No, I didn't see any hands go up, and that's pretty cool. This is probably my worst fear. Germs. How many of you are afraid of germs? Any germaphobes out there? Thank you. Afterwards, see me and we won't shake hands, okay? Those are just some fears. Now, I want to give you 4 common fears that we as human beings battle with from time to time in our lives. See if any of these fears pertain to you. And these are kind of just categorized fears. But I've got check boxes on your outline if you want to take notes this morning. And just check off which one of these apply to you. And the first common fear that we battle is the fear of loss. We battle the fear of loss. You might be afraid of losing your spouse. You might be afraid of losing a child. You might be afraid of financial loss if you lost everything you had. We fear losing our jobs. We fear losing investments, losing control, and sometimes even losing our tempers. We fear some of those things in loss. So if that pertains to you, just check that box right there next to that one. And let's move on to the second one. Another common fear is the fear of failure. We're afraid of failing, and so we fear that maybe sometimes we're just not good enough to compete. And sometimes since we fear failure, we don't even go into the games because we're afraid that we're going to lose in that game. Maybe you've wanted to teach a Sunday school class or lead a small group here in the church, but you fear that no one will show up. Or you fear that a lot of people are going to show up and they're going to ask you questions that you have no idea how to answer that. So you fear that you're going to be a failure at that. So we fear that we're going to fail. So we put off starting a ministry, we put off starting a new business or going back to school to get that degree or reaching out even to someone in need. We fear that we're just going to fail at these things. So why even try? So if that pertains to you, check that box. Put a tick in that box. Many of us often battle the next one, the fear of rejection. The fear of rejection. Guys, you're afraid to ask that girl out because you're afraid she's going to reject you. She's going to look at you and go, ew, why would I want to go out with you? I have feared that in my own life. Fortunately, I'm married now, and she didn't say, ew, for very long. I mean, at all. But we fear being rejected. We're afraid that our spouse might leave us because they just have rejected us now and they don't want to be with us anymore. Some people have this people-pleasing mindset, and they fear rejection because they're thinking things like, will they like my hairstyle, the way I walk? Will they like the way I talk, the clothes that I buy? The car that I drive, the kind of job that I have, am I important enough for others? And people-pleasing mindsets have all this going on in their minds, and they're afraid of being rejected. So we go through life worrying people reject us. So if that's you, check that box. Finally, some of us battle with the fear of the unknown. We don't know what the future is going to hold. We don't know what it has for us. We look into the future and we wonder, What if I get cancer someday? What if I get some kind of debilitating disease? What if I suffer, in my deathbed? What if I lost my job? What if I can't retire? What if it snows again tomorrow? Oh. Chances are it's going to, so don't worry about it. All right? Have you ever heard somebody say, life is going pretty good right now, but I'm afraid something bad is bound to happen? Anybody hear or even say that before? Yeah, we think life is going so well right now, but we're afraid of just what might happen tomorrow. We're afraid of the future and the unknown, and it's going so well, it just might get messed up somehow. So check that box if you're afraid or have been afraid of the unknown. Now, question, honesty time. How many of you checked all 4 boxes? Okay, good, a few of you. We'll start a support group maybe for you sometime. We have fears in our lives. Now, fear, though, isn't always a bad thing. You think about what our parents taught us as we were growing up. Our parents taught us to look both ways before crossing the street. Why? A car might run over you. That's a good fear to have, okay? It's a respectful kind of fear. Our parents taught us go swimming with a buddy. Why? Well, in case you drown, you have somebody there to save you. If there's nobody there, you're going to die. Well, that's a good fear to have. Our parents taught us don't stick anything in the light socket. Why? Because your hair will go and you'd look like an idiot, and you might die. Those are good fears to have. And so there are good fears to have because for practical reasons, there are these dangers in life that we probably should respect and fear. Even God taught us to fear one thing, and what's that? Him. So God taught us to fear Him. But what about these other fears that we have in our lives? What about these 4 categories that are consuming us, that paralyze us, and keep us from reaching our God-given potentials? How do we deal with those? Well, turn to Mark chapter 4. And we're going to look in Mark chapter 4 this morning. If you want to use the Bibles in the pews, it's on page 747. 747 in those Bibles. We're going to look at Mark chapter 4. And there's an encounter that Jesus has with His apostles. And they get pretty freaked out. Now, Jesus is teaching the crowds all day long. Here, He's probably out there healing them. And we know He's teaching. If you read all of chapter 4 of Mark, you'll see, all these little lessons that He teaches them. But Jesus decides, what, I'm tired, I need a rest. So He's going to spend some time alone with His disciples, and it's lesson time, as it always is with Jesus. So pick up the story in verse 35 of Mark chapter 4. Mark writes, That day when evening came, He said to His disciples, let's go over to the other side. Leaving the crowd behind, they took Him along just as He was in the boat. There were also other boats with Him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke Him and said to Him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? He got up, rebuked the wind, and He said to the waves, Quiet, be still. Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. Here's where we're going to spend a lot of our time this morning. Verse 40, He said to His disciples, Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? Why are you so afraid? Jesus says. Why are you so afraid? Now, I think it's interesting. The word that Jesus used here for afraid is used only 4 other times in the New Testament. Okay, this isn't the common word phobos, which is phobia. We get the Greek word phobos for phobia. That word is used many times in the New Testament, but the word that Jesus uses here connotes something a little more significant than just fright or panic. Okay? Jesus uses this word delos, and it's more than just fright or panic. I'll give you a word picture here. The lion from The Wizard of Oz. We called him the cowardly lion. The cowardly lion lived in a state of delos. He was always constantly afraid of everything that was going on around him and in his life. And that's kind of how the disciples are acting here. Jesus is literally asking His disciples, why are you acting so cowardly? What's the deal? Why are you being cowards about this? Now, maybe you can hear the disciples kind of in their minds thinking like, whoa, wait a minute, Jesus, who was it that decided to get away from the crowds? Wasn't it Jesus? Who said that we should get into this boat and go across this lake where these storms pop up all the time? It was Jesus. And who is sleeping in the middle of the storm right now on a cushion like nothing's happening? Jesus is. Why am I acting so cowardly? What in the world? But I don't think the disciples actually were looking to Jesus to calm the storm or save them or anything like that. Because we get this sense that the disciples are kind of upset with Jesus. They're angry with him because he's sleeping on a cushion in the stern of the boat. I think they were upset with Jesus because he didn't join them in worrying about their current situation. Know what I mean? How many times do you find yourself worrying about things that are so dire in your life, so disastrous, so traumatic in your own life, and you think that everyone around you should be in the same boat? In other words, they should be just as worried about it as you are, if not more. Been there? You don't understand why they're not as upset about the situation as you are. So what do you say to that person? Don't you? Yeah, don't you care? Don't you care? Don't you care that I'm sick right now? I mean, you should be as upset about this as I am. I mean, come on. Have a little empathy here. Don't you care that our son is in the hospital? Don't you care that we're running out of money and it's like the middle of the month? What are we going to do? Don't you care that our shelves are empty? Don't you care that our car is broken down? Don't you care that the roof is leaking and the sink doesn't work and the snow needs to be shoveled and my mom, your mother-in-law, is coming over for dinner this weekend? Don't you care? Don't you care? When we're in the middle of these storms in our life, like the disciples, oftentimes we just want somebody to just care about what we're going through, to have a little bit of panic and be frightened, just maybe a little bit like we are. We have real fears going on, and we just want someone to care. Now, I want to give you a couple of thoughts. It might change your perspective a little bit in this, okay? And the first thought is this: your fears reveal what you value the most. Your fears reveal what you value the most. That's okay. You might fear that you're going to lose your marriage, but that shows that you value the person you're married to. There's nothing wrong with that. You might fear that something's going to happen with your children, your kids. You might lose them or something. Something bad's going to happen. You might fear that, but that's okay because you value your children. You might fear that you're going to lose your job or you're going to lose your money, and so you value financial security and kind of that peace. That's okay. We should value that. That's not a bad thing. But let me give you the second thought, and it's this: your fears reveal where you trust God the least. Your fears reveal where you trust God the least. So you're worried about your marriage. But the real question is, have you really trusted God to take care of it? Have you trusted God to pick up the pieces? You worry about your children, but the question is, have you really given your kids to God? Have you entrusted them into His care? You worry about your finances. Do you really trust God to provide for you and take care of you? I think if we really trusted God with this stuff, then maybe we wouldn't worry so much. These fears wouldn't paralyze us from becoming our God-given ability and our God-given potential. Kind of back to the story, the disciples, here they were in the situation with Jesus. Now, they hadn't been following Jesus that long. Jesus had just called them prior to this to be his apostles. But in this short time with Jesus, they got to see his power in action, okay? They saw him heal lepers and paralytics. They watched him drive out demons from people. I mean, you talk about belief. I'd believe that guy right now. I'm just, here, Jesus, I'm yours. That's crazy stuff, man. They knew that this man, Jesus, he was somebody special. He knew there was something special about this guy. They knew there was something special about this guy. Now, in spite of all of that, they're in this boat, their fears overshadow their faith. Why didn't they go to Jesus and just trust him and ask him, hey, save us. We know you're the man. You can do something. Their fears overshadow their faith. They let their fears get the best of them. Their fears show that they value their lives. Nothing wrong with that. That's not a bad thing. I value my life. However, their fears show that they really didn't trust this man who promised them that they would make fishers of men. Their fears overshadow their faith. Our fears overshadow our faith from time to time, because I think we rate what we can see above what we can't see. We rate what we can see above what we can't see. Think about that. We can see our marriages falling apart. We can see our money draining from our savings account, our checking account. It's like going out the window. We can see our kids wandering away from the faith. We can see all that. It's happening. It's real. It's in our lives. What we can't see is God picking up the pieces of our marriage. We can't see that. We don't know. Is He? We can't see God providing for us or getting ready to provide for us. We can't see God steering our kids back into faith. We can't see that until it happens. So we can't really see God interacting in our lives until something significant happens and we go, oh, okay, yeah, God was there the whole time. I should have trusted Him more. Aha! That's just it. We value what we can see above what we can't see. And so what ends up happening is our fears overshadow our faith. So what do we do? How do we quit living in fear? How do we just kind of give it to God? Well, here, the first thing we got to do is acknowledge our fears and trust God. Acknowledge what our fear is, acknowledge what our fears are, and trust God to take care of it. Instead of kind of brushing aside your fears and it's kind of over here, or sometimes, we plug our ears and we close our eyes and go, oh, I'm not going to let this bother me. We do that because we don't want to pay attention to what our fear really is. We kind of ignore it. Instead of doing that, decide to acknowledge what your real fear is. Attack it head on. King David, in Psalm chapter 56, verses 2 through 4, David had just been captured by the Philistines. He's a prisoner and he's afraid. Here's what he says. My slanderers pursue me all day long. Many are attacking me in their pride. Now David addresses his fear right on. This is what's going on. My enemies got me. I'm afraid that what they're going to do to me. And so in verse 3 he says, when I am afraid, I will trust you. In God, whose word I praise, in God I trust, I will not be afraid. What can mortal man do to me? I like that. What can mortal man do to me? when I'm afraid of losing my kids, when I'm afraid about my future, when I'm afraid of not making ends meet, I will trust in you, God. Acknowledge your fear and trust it to God. Go hand in hand. I don't care what mortal man can do. I don't care that mortal man can make fun of me, slander me. I don't care that they can hurt me. I don't care that they can kill me. Doesn't matter what mortal man does. What does matter is, in whom do I put my trust? I will trust in you, God, is what David says. I left a blank in your outline for you to fill in. It says, I'm not trusting God with. I don't know the answer to that. You got to fill that in. What is it you're not trusting God with? What is it you're afraid of that you're kind of ignoring, or you kind of let it get the best of you and it overshadows your faith in God? I'm not trusting God with. What is your real fear? Is it your children, your future, your health, someone you love, your aging parents, your finances, on and on and on it goes? What area of your life are you not trusting God with? Let me give you a couple seconds. Fill that in. I'm not trusting God with what? We've got to acknowledge what our fears are. We've got to trust that God is going to take care of it. Then we got to seek God. Seek Him. Not just kind of shoot up a prayer and hope He hears. No, I mean go after God. See if He can really take care of me. Seek God until He takes away these fears. We need to seek Him in His Word. We need to seek Him through prayer. We need to seek Him by having other people pray for us. Seek God day and night until He takes away your fears. David, again, in Psalm chapter 34, he says, I sought the Lord, and He answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. He delivered me from all my fears. David went after God till God said, okay, you're free. No longer can you be afraid. I like Beth Moore. She writes some pretty good stuff. I know our ladies have studied through some of her things, and came across one of her stories in one of her books about her greatest fear. You know what Beth Moore's greatest fear was? Anybody? Losing her husband. I don't know who said that. Somebody. Beth Moore's greatest fear was losing her husband. And she writes about this in one of her books. She describes her dialogue with God like this. She says to God, God, what if I lose my husband? What if I lose him? And she felt like God said to her, well, what if? Well, if I lost him, I'd go numb. Next few days, my friends would probably help me get ready for the funeral, and I would just kind of get through it. God said back to her, well, okay. And then what? She said, well, then, I probably wouldn't get dressed for a month. I'd just sit around the house and cry and cry and cry and cry. She felt like God was saying to her, yeah, and then what? She said, well, I'd probably not get dressed for another month, just sit at home and cry and miss him and be devastated. She felt like God said, well, then what? Isn't that funny when you go to God? He keeps saying, and then what? Think about the future. And then what? She said, well, at some point, I would probably start to seek you. I would probably come to you, Lord, and you would be faithful, and you would help me get on with life. God said to her, exactly. Exactly. At some point in our fears, we need to seek God and go after Him until He takes our fears away. So go ahead, start asking these what if questions. What if I lose my husband? What if I lose one of my children? What if I go bankrupt? What if I lose my job? What if the economy tanks again? You might go through a difficult time. No doubt about it. But what can mortal man do to you? When you seek God and fully trust yourself into His hands, it doesn't matter what mortal man can do to you, because God's going to take care of you. So the storms of life are going to come on you just as they did with the disciples. And we're going to ask, where's Jesus? Where is He in this turmoil in my life? Why isn't He worried? Why doesn't He care about my fears? But in the midst of these storms, we learn how much we really do trust Jesus. In the midst of these fears, we learn how much we really do trust Jesus. And here's the question: do you want someone who's just going to simply worry about what you're afraid of? Or do you want somebody who's going to come along and say, let me help you through this. Trust in me, I'll get you through this, and I'll calm the storm in your life. Trust in Jesus. Seek God until He takes away your fears. Years ago, a preacher at a revival, he was teaching the crowd how to trust Jesus completely in every trial and every fear. Over and over again, the preacher repeated the phrase, trusting Jesus in your trials means that in every circumstance you can keep on saying, for this I have Jesus. And he kept repeating that phrase. Trusting Jesus in your trials means that in every circumstance you can keep on saying, for this I have Jesus. So at the end of the meeting, back then they would call people forward and they give testimonies. You know, what's going on in your life? Tell me a testimony. How's this message reach you? That kind of thing. The young lady who had been playing the piano that night, she stood up and she said this, I have to leave shortly. I'd like to be the first to give my testimony. She says, just a few minutes ago, I was handed a telegram. It reads, Mother is very ill. Take train home immediately. She says this, when I saw those words, I knew that tonight's message was meant just for me. My heart looked up and I said, for this, I have Jesus. And instantly a peace and strength flooded my soul. Now, after pausing a moment, probably to collect herself, she continues and she says, I've never traveled very far alone. But for this, I have Jesus. And for all the strain and suspense that goes with the thought of my mother's severe illness, I praise God that for this too.